Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of TIME100 Talks. I'm your Talks correspondent, Ashley Seaford. This week, Time revealed the 2020 TIME100, our annual list of the world's most influential people. Now, all week long, TIME100 Talks will host in-depth conversations with extraordinary thought leaders, changemakers, artists, and activists featured on this year's list. And what a year it's been. 2020 has brought us defining moment after defining moment. Globally, countries are still wrestling with the realities of a deadly pandemic. Meanwhile, a new wave of activism has made possible a worldwide movement for racial justice and equality. Plus, Here in the US, we're approaching an important presidential election. All of these things are converging at a pivotal moment. As a result, we're seeing individuals here in the US and across the world mobilize to find solutions for a future that is better, stronger, more unified, and more resilient. Last night on ABC, Time unveiled all 100 members of the Time 100 class of 2020. For the next 3 days, yes, 3 days, we will have a chance to speak with many of these leaders who are poised to make an even greater impact on our world. Those joining us today are Google and Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai, musical group The Chicks, Time 100 alumni, who will also share a special performance with us, best-selling novelist Tomi Adeyemi, and the executive director of Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley, Sister Norma Pimentel. She'll be joined by former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Julián Castro, who wrote her Time 100 tribute. Before we get started, we'd like to thank Citi for making all of today's conversations with these leaders and changemakers possible. Here's a special message from Mark Mason, the CFO of Citi.
For almost a century, Time magazine has shown us that progress only happens if you take action. At Citi, we're changing the ways we work to help communities of color build greater wealth and stronger futures. The efforts we've launched this week will create more than $1 billion in value in the next 3 years. Learn more at citigroup.com/racial equity.
Thank you, Mark. Now let's kick things off with a message about inspiration from the first woman of color to appear on a major party's presidential ticket. Here is Senator Kamala Harris, member of the 2020 Time 100.
Hi, I'm Kamala Harris, and thank you for including me on your Time 100 list for 2020. This is truly an honor. When I think of someone who inspires me, it's the new generation of leadership. And so I say to them, you are pushing us to realize the ideals of our nation. You are pushing us to live the values we share: decency and fairness, justice, equal justice, and love. You remind us that to love our country is to fight for the ideals of our country. You are patriots. In this election, we have a chance to change the course of history, and we're all in this fight, and you are pushing and leading the way.
From one woman who has broken down barriers to another, we'd also like to take a moment to recognize the life and achievements of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died last week of complications from cancer. Throughout the course of her career, Ginsburg became known for her relentless advocacy for gender equality and her belief that the law could be a force for change. In a 1977 interview with Time, conducted more than a decade before she took her seat at the Supreme Court, then Professor Ginsburg described what she saw as the purpose of the American legal system: to reflect and respond to the needs of the society it serves, preserving freedom while preventing turmoil. Here are just a few moments from Justice Ginsburg's remarkable life and impact on our nation.
Despite her enormous ability and academic achievements, she could not get a job with a law firm in the early 1960s because she was a woman and the mother of a small child. Having experienced discrimination, she devoted the next 20 years of her career to fighting it and making this country a better place for our wives, our mothers, our sisters, and our daughters.
You're watching Time 100 Talks, and our first guest is two-time member of the Time 100, Google and Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai. He will be joined by former Time editor and director of Harvard Shorenstein Center, Nancy Gibbs.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm Nancy Gibbs. I'm an editor-at-large at Time and the director of the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. And welcome Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Alphabet and Google.
Hi, Nancy. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So I just want to start, because we're on opposite ends of the country, and everything I see from California looks terrifying. What's the view like out your window?
It is. I'm grateful to finally have. It's been the air quality has been pretty bad from the wildfires, and you are right. The sky has been gray or orange, and slightly apocalyptic in terms of how it looked. But for the past 24, 48 hours, I think it's been looking better, but it's been a good, vivid reminder of what the threat of climate change, and in some ways, as we were working on our sustainability announcements, it was almost surreal to have a real world check of what the threats could be play out as we were working on those.
You made a big announcement recently, and you've been aggressive on the issue of climate, of energy, of carbon offsets, but you took that even further now of a goal of being totally carbon free in 10 years. Tell me what that would mean.
Good. As a company, this has been one of the issues we have felt from early days, and it's been a founding value. Larry, Sergey were always focused on it. I remember as early as, in the 2000s, Google became carbon neutral in 2007. We really looked ahead to, supporting renewable energy investments. There was a big focus for us. Obviously, in 2017, we matched 100% of our global energy consumption with renewable energy. But the threat is only, if anything, it's getting more urgent. I grew up in Chennai, India, and most of my life we had droughts and we had water scarcity. But in 2015, we had a 1 in 100-year flood, which had never happened. And more recently, the Australian wildfires, the California wildfires, and events around the world, shows how urgent the issue is. So we want to dig deep and push and see what we can do, how we can push the industry, the ecosystem forward. We want to have a multiplicative effect. And so two things. In our third decade, we are eliminating all our carbon legacy. So as of last week, we are overall carbon neutral through the history of our operations. But more importantly, and that does use offsets, but the bigger, more technically hard thing we are taking on is that by 2030, we aim to run our operations, carbon-free on a 24/7 basis everywhere we operate. And so as you can imagine, that means locally, you need to make sure each data center has renewable energy locally and how we run it 24/7. So those are the kinds of things we are working hard to figure out.
I feel like, I don't know if you're having this experience since you live in the world of technology, but that for most of us, our whole relationship with technology has changed so much these last 6 months. How we shop, how we go to the doctor, how we teach, how we learn. In leading through COVID, you were one of the very early companies to say that you'd be working remotely till July of 2021. I'm wondering how you were thinking about which of these changes are permanent and which are temporary.
Oh, it's a great question. And, as a company, we have always tried to think about the future of work all through our company. If you remember, if you recall, Google was one of the first companies to, have this view that, workplace could be fun and be it having micro kitchens or, we always focused on reducing friction for our employees, give them shuttles, both so that they can be more productive, we can build community, but also so that their personal lives could be better. So it's the same philosophy we still have, but we are thinking it through in the context of COVID. To me, it's always made me wonder, when I see people commuting 2 hours and away from their families and friends on a Friday, you realize they can't have plans and so on. So I think we can do better. Those are the good things to come out of it. early on as this started, I realized this is going to be a period of tremendous uncertainty. So we wanted to lean in and give certainty where we could. And the reason we made the decision to do work from home till mid of next year is we realized people were trying hard to plan, constantly think about what it is, and it was affecting productivity. So in some ways, we wanted to give people the certainty. It also forces us to embrace it and think hard about the kind of work environment, the tools we need, how can we get people to collaborate. So we are, for example, reconfiguring our spaces so that people can plan and come for on-sites. And assuming you're off-site, how do you foster a way by which people can come on-site? And so I see the future as definitely being more flexible. We firmly believe that in-person being together, having that sense of community is super important for whenever you have to solve hard problems, you have to create something new. So we don't see that changing. So we don't think the future is just 100% remote or something. We definitely see, we value our offices, we value the culture, but we do think we need to create more flexibility and some more hybrid models. So that's how we are thinking about it.
One of the things all of us who are parents are dealing with now, even if we're able to work remotely, and obviously there are many, many people who can't, it's the nature of their jobs that they can't, but their children may not be in school. Google has really leaned into the education space. There are shortages of Chromebooks, which are more essential now than ever. How do you address that, and what kinds of things are you doing to try to make this necessarily remote education experience work better?
No, it's a really important topic. For a long time, we've been proud of our efforts in education. We feel it's core to our mission. Our mission is to provide access to information, and no other place it's more relevant than education. With remote learning, I'm proud of the possibilities, be it G Suite or Google Classroom or Chromebooks can enable. I'm really concerned about the digital divide. In remote learning, I think it can exacerbate differences. We have worked hard in California. We've supported the governor's program to provide, we've committed resources and grants to, provide connectivity and devices in disadvantaged communities and areas. So we've done efforts like that. Part of the reason we work hard to make Chromebooks more affordable itself is to allow for more digital reach. We realize gone are those days where people can have education without access to devices and connectivity, and so we are doing our part to make it more affordable. But the real solutions here are coming from teachers and educators, and they are working hard trying to adapt, and it's definitely hard, and I think we have long ways to go.
We started off talking about the environment. I have a different environmental challenge I want to raise, one that I think is also extremely dangerous. You're a man of science, you're a believer in progress. How do you think about the rejection of science and the very idea of the possibility of truth and the willingness of people to reject evidence that we knew existed, but which we have seen at sort of life and death stakes in these last 6 months? How do you account for that? How do you think about that?
It's a good question. I think, I would say that in general, look, when I look at the scientific progress, there are many areas where people accept it and understand it and adopt it. We all wear seatbelts in the country today, and so we understand the importance of it. It's progress based on science, and we accept it. I think the pandemic is a big stressor. I think people's lives are very disrupted, and so I think it brings a lot of other issues and sometimes conflates it with science as well. I've always, for example, in the UK, they take this role of public explanation of science as as an important role. I feel models like that are important. We need to engage. I think a lot of times people who are vested in science and technology just take it for granted that the benefits are obvious, or and And technology obviously is a dual-edged sword. It has both upsides and downsides. And, I think, so we have to be transparent about that. And at times where technology doesn't work, we have to acknowledge that as well. But I think, I'm optimistic. I think more and more people, I see it working in many areas. The current issue, I feel, is not just a scientific issue. It brings in, other important aspects of, people's, how people perceive their freedoms and rights. And so I think there's some conflation of issues. But, I look at the state of vaccine progress. We have to remember COVID is a shared humanity crisis. I've never seen an event, at least in my lifetime, where the entire world concurrently is dealing with it at the same time. When I look at the fact that the top companies, top scientific institutions are all working towards one common purpose on a vaccine, I'm more encouraged by it than not. And, and I think when we have progress, I think you'll find, people are looking for a solution. And so I think, I'm optimistic, there'll be acceptance too.
Obviously, a lot of people are very concerned about the quality of information and the amount of misinformation around the election, not just cybersecurity issues, but candidates and their allies using platforms to undermine the very legitimacy of the outcome. How do you view Alphabet's responsibility in a sort of electoral hygiene? How does your trust and safety department think about the measures to be taken before and during and after what's bound to be an election unlike any we've ever seen?
This is, holding free and safe elections is as foundational to the functioning of a democracy as it gets. And, as an information company, we view it as one of the most important responsibilities we have. There's a lot more awareness, I think, and I think, so the scale of our efforts are significantly larger. We have more than 30 teams across the company working around the clock and coordinating leading up to it. We are partnering with many organizations outside, including news organizations, leading up to the election and so on, to make sure the information we provide is accurate. When we find evidence of issues, we update government agencies, intelligence agencies. We've gotten information back. The other companies are coordinating. But I do think it's important. We are all putting in a lot of effort, but I think we have to stay vigilant because the stakes are high in a democracy through an election cycle.
My Time colleague Charlotte Alter recently did a piece about conspiracy theories in this election, and she likened the spread of those theories to being like on a water slide to hell. And I'm curious about why you think the problem of online extremism, YouTube as a vehicle of radicalization, why has that been so hard to solve?
For YouTube, its primary thrust of all our efforts has been around content responsibility for almost 3 years. We've made a lot of progress actually to make progress in all of these areas. YouTube at its heart, the overwhelming usage of YouTube we see is as a learning entertainment platforms, but misinformation can be dangerous. Online platforms can play a role in amplifying it. So the work we have done to understand what is either misinformation or low quality content and make sure that doesn't get recommended and shared has been, the thrust of our efforts there. The difficulty comes when there are areas which are nuanced and people don't agree on, the balance between free speech and what is, the wrong kind of speech to propagate, and that's been hard and at scale. It's not an excuse. We all, so the amount we invest in these areas have significantly scaled up. And I think we are making a lot of progress. I think it's important to understand, even in YouTube, there is a lot of information on the other side flowing as well. I think when I look at, even be it COVID or, when I look at the information which involves actually educating people, so there's a scale, that part is also working well. So in some ways we view that as a big part of the solution as well. But, it's a fair question, and it's where most of our effort is going into on particularly on YouTube. And in fact, that's been the single highest focus for the team for the past 3 years now.
You're right that one of the kind of protections against bad information is good information. And another area of concern I know has been much on your mind is about local sources of local news and the extinction level event of many local newspapers and other news sources. And I'm wondering to what extent you feel a responsibility, because Google's tremendous power over the advertising market was a driver of that business model collapse. So how do you see your role in rebuilding a viable local news environment?
At a high level, I think the internet was a big disruptor, to the model. And, as a company, in fact, I would argue compared to most companies, we work hard to drive traffic back to publishers. Part of the reason we invest so much in ad technology and we build such comprehensive tools is because we can provide advertising and we share most of our revenues back. But I want to be very clear. I mean, it's definitely, it's been very hard on the news industry and particularly local news and through the pandemic. And, we have done specific programs. We are doing grants. We are introducing new licensing program. As a company, we paid over $14 billion to publishers in 2018. We are trying to engage in deeper engagements with many companies directly to try and help them through. I know, for example, we worked hard, with Time magazine, thinking about how we can drive more traffic or increase subscriptions. It's the same approach we take to other news publications as well. But look, this is a hard issue in the industry. The current cost structure versus where distribution is and alternate sources for inventory for advertising. I view these as like big secular changes, which are happening. And so I think it's a period of transition. We don't have all the answers. I don't think we alone can solve, but we feel the responsibility to do our part. And obviously, it's an area where we want to think and do more, and we are committed to figuring out more answers.
Inclusion is very much on many of our minds, particularly after events of recent months. And another of the really bold commitments you made had to do with the leadership at the company and your aspirations to build a much more diverse and inclusive workforce. Can you talk a little about how you're approaching that?
Obviously, it weighed a lot on us, just like others. The recent events around around racial equity, and we publicly have committed as a company to building sustainable equity. Diversity and inclusion is an important value for the company. And so both internally and externally. And so we've committed to improving leadership representation in underrepresented groups by 30% by 2025. As a technology industry, we haven't kept pace, and we are definitely, Google was one of the first companies to issue transparency reports so that people can see where we are today. Progress has been slow, so we are committing to clear goals, and we are improving our processes on hiring, retention, performance processes within the company, instituting new training programs. And externally, we want to work on products and programs that will be helpful to Black plus community and other underrepresented groups. And so we will have more to come here, and we wanted to make sure we took the energy from the moment and the rightful outrage from that moment and translate it into longer lasting change. And that's something we are deeply committed, but we have more work to do.
Since we all are looking for hope, and we're all looking for the things that bring us together and the discoveries that are uniting, and there's so much that seems to be dividing people. I'm wondering where your greatest source of hope is coming from these days.
For me, it is looking at the next generation, right? So we started the conversation with sustainability. there is not a single person of the next generation who you talk to, their level of understanding and desire for action around climate change, to use an example, is what gives me that hope. I've always felt humanity gets better with each generation. It's how while every generation worries about the next generation, I think the next generation actually advances and drives progress. So, I get that hope from my kids when I look at them, and from their friends and that generation when I see the efforts they are involved in. I see personal examples of the focus on mental health, for example, as another example, in addition to climate change. So racial equity as an example. So when I look at the next generation, I feel that sense of hope and optimism.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and all the work that you're doing on all of these very complex challenges.
Thanks, Nancy. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Citi is partnering with World Central Kitchen, who have transformed how we feed our communities during the pandemic. By connecting people who need meals with restaurant and delivery workers who need to earn a living, they can support restaurants and fight hunger at the same time.
All show long, we're featuring voices who are a part of the larger Time 100 community. Our next guests, Natalie, Marty, and Emily, also known as the Chicks, were included on the list in 2006 in recognition of their platinum-selling music and their headline-making political statements. Later on in the show, we'll get a special performance from them, but first, Time's Raisa Bruner will chat with them about their new album, among other things. Raisa?
Thanks, Ashley. I'm Raisa Bruner, and I'm joined today by the Chicks, Natalie Maines, Marty McGuire, and Emily Strayer, who are also members of the Time 100. Welcome to Time 100 Talks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's jump right in. This summer, you released your newest album, Gaslighter, your first one in 14 years. And even though it was delayed a bit from the spring and you haven't been able to tour, it's been very warmly received. And also the songs have felt more timely than ever, touching on protests and uplifting women and sisterhood. So what has the silver lining been for you about releasing new music into this strange new world?
I'm just glad we got the album done before COVID hit. There are a lot of artists who were probably stuck right in the middle of their project, and I know the way that the three of us work, and we would not have been able to do that remotely. We really need to be in the same room. So I just felt lucky that we got that done, even though we couldn't tour and we couldn't do the traditional rollout. It was nice to be able to give it to the fans.
You three were named to the Time 100 in 2006, which is amazing because that's the last time you released an album. It was also 3 years after you had been publicly the target of backlash after some negative comments about George W. Bush. And it's interesting because so much has changed since then in terms of how audiences react to artists speaking out. And it doesn't feel like people say that you should just shut up and sing anymore. So are you encouraged by the changes that you felt happening in terms of how fans relate to public figures?
Well, I'll just say first, I'm really glad we're now allowed to not shut up and sing. We're allowed to have an opinion now, apparently. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that change. And some artists credit us with kind of being the guinea pigs and having to take the heat just so maybe a little more of that can happen. And I'm proud of that. I'm glad people like Taylor Swift is coming into her own and realizing she doesn't have to mask who she is, especially to her country music fans. And it seems like today everybody has a platform. So it's not just artists. Everybody can say whatever they want, for better or for worse. There are aspects of it I hate on social media, where things that aren't true get perpetuated, and it stokes up a lot of fear in people. And an artist might say one thing that they should have probably said a different way, and then they're just kind of, everybody piles on. So in that respect, I think there are some negatives as well.
One of the biggest changes, besides how artists and their fans interact, is with your group specifically this summer, you changed your name, no small thing. You dropped the Dixie. What has that felt like? Why did you feel it was necessary, and why right now this summer?
Well, we had wanted to change our name for a long time. I think since the controversy, just it was really weird to us and a surprise that people. I feel like we've always been outspoken and honest about who we are, and I don't think we try to make it a point to. We don't preach from the stage. We don't feel. I mean, we do feel like we're musicians, and that's what we do best, and that's what we want to do. When we're on stage performing. So there's not a lot of preaching from the stage and that sort of thing. But so it was weird when people thought we were something that we so weren't. And so at that point I was just like, ugh, like this word Dixie is like, ugh, it feels gross, right? Now. And so, but it also seemed like nobody was asking us to do it. Nobody ever had a problem with the word Dixie. Everybody always had a problem with the word chicks. And so it just seemed like, okay, why change something when you've had all of the success and it's a brand, when people aren't even asking you to. It's like creating a problem that nobody's asking you to create. And then with George Floyd's murder, and all of that happening, and a lot of things were changing. And when I saw that NASCAR had banned the Dixie flag, I just immediately was like, okay, we're done. We're doing this. And of course, everyone completely agreed. And we had to wait, it was like 2 weeks from when we made the decision to do it and when we actually did it, just because we wanted to get all of our legal ducks in a row. And I mean, the Chicks is not that original of a name, as far as that's just a very standard word. We didn't know if we'd be able to get it legally cleared. We also thought there's probably 1 million bands called the Chicks. Like, it just seems like something people would be called already. And luckily there was just one, a sister duo in New Zealand, and they said they would happily share the name with us. So
what I love about it is it seems like you're doubling down on criticisms that may have been leveled at you before. It's very tongue-in-cheek in a way. You've always been pigeonholed by the industry as just a group of girls, perhaps, and women in general and in country music especially have to work twice as hard for half as much airtime, if that much. Do you think there has been progress in the last few years since you released music in the past towards improving that experience for women in music?
I think it's gotten worse, don't y'all? I mean, as far as the country format, I mean, we don't really know what genre we're in, but from what we hear, when we were coming out, there were a lot more females on radio than there are now. And so there was what was it called, the Tomato Gate or whatever. So,
right.
One of the programmers said, well, men make up the main part of the salad. They're the lettuce and the women are the tomatoes. And these women are like, they were all up in arms, and they should have been. We weren't being played then, so it didn't have any effect on us. But I think in recent years, it's been definitely male dominated.
Yeah. What kind of changes would you like to see to make the industry more equal, or give women and people of color and artists of color more access? Or what do you think fans can do to support those kinds of changes?
Well, listen, that's just talking about radio and a radio format. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think on the whole, the industry, with how many ways you can get your music and how many ways you can find new music. I mean, I don't think my children have listened to 1 hour of terrestrial radio in their whole lives. Maybe when we're in Hawaii, because it's kind of fun to listen to the locals. But that's it. So I actually think that levels the playing field a lot more, because you're not dependent on, some guy smoking a cigar behind a desk deciding if you're going to get played on the radio. And back in the day, that was how you made it big, was to be played on the radio. And now there's so many options, and it's, I feel like it's just diversified music so much. You can get your hands on whatever it is you're looking for, and I think that's awesome. And yeah, so we honestly don't even and I know I'm not just speaking for myself, because I guarantee you, if I was like, hey guys, where are we on the charts? We don't know. We don't know. We really just wanted to make this record and have people, our fans, like it. And I've always cared too what critics say, because I think that they're critics for a reason. And so, people always, I don't care what the critics say, I just care what my fans say. I do want to have, an album that critics don't bash, because we put so much effort into it, and you feel like it's really good. And so it'd be a real bummer if the consensus was blah.
Do you have a vision for what comes next in music? You talked about how there are all these different platforms that especially younger generations can access. When shows return, when some kind of normalcy returns, what do you think your experience as artists may look like, and as performers?
I don't know. The 5G stuff intrigues me a little bit, as far as being able to create, because the live show, there's nothing like live. You want to play to the people, but to be able to film in new ways and create a world, whether it's virtual reality or whatever it is around the experience, I think would be super fun. But I don't, we're just ready to get this pandemic over with and get on the road, to be honest.
It's the best part of what we do. I mean, we have a lot of fun in the studio, but we were so looking forward to the tour starting in June, and our kids were geared up, and Natalie's boys were rehearsing. They both have bands, and they were going to open the tour, and we had most of the visuals kind of sorted out what it was going to look like, and doing set lists. And yeah, we just feel like kind of the rug got pulled in, and just not knowing if it can even happen in the same way even 2 years from now. I think we're looking at reinventing the way we interact with an audience live for a long time to come. So yes, we are constantly thinking about, what nobody knows what the landscape's going to be like, but technology has come a long way, and there might be some intriguing options for how to do that in the future.
So I think I mentioned this, but I've been listening to your album a lot lately, and the song For Her, which you are performing today for TIME100 Talks, has felt newly poignant after the passing this weekend of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So many of the lyrics, there's one, so dig a little deeper and be a whole lot louder. It sounds to me like a mantra she may have used or said at one point. And one we could all use. So I have to ask, where are you guys finding that internal strength to dig deep right now and work harder?
Well, it's interesting, that song in particular, in the studio, we discussed whether we would do an excerpt of hers to start the song for the album. And we eventually decided not to do that.
Jack had we arrived at the studio one day, because we've been working on that song the night before, and we get there the next day, and he's always in there, working on stuff. And we hear her voice in the song, and we're like, what's happening? What did you do? And he's like, this could be cool, Ruth, RBG. And her words were really awesome. We, for whatever reason, chose not to put it in. But yeah, so that is a coincidence I hadn't really connected.
At the end, where Nat kind of starts humming at the end, she kind of came in and floated over with some of her more poignant quotes. And now I'm wishing we had done that.
We'll do a remix.
Yeah. Clearly, she was someone that the three of you looked up to, as so many women have in the U.S. Are there any specific lessons or things that you took from her and from her example?
I think about the era in which she grew up in and raised in, and for her to have such amazingly progressive and insightful views on what's right and what's wrong and justice is is amazing. I don't know of many people of her generation that would have been so ahead of their time, before their time. So, you know, we're all raising kids and we're all trying to impart some kind of wisdom. And she is a woman that women like us, you know, they're a role model. And the older you get, the fewer role models that are older than you are left. And it's just really sad that this very strong, persuasive role model is gone. But her legacy lives on in what she did and what she said and what she stood for.
And we need women like her on the bench. We need it. And so it's a scary time right now.
You know, it's never too late too. I've been, you know, deep diving into a lot of her history. I'd seen the documentary and things, obviously, but was listening to the Daily podcast this morning and don't remember ever knowing that, you know, she didn't start off being this feminist and this badass. Like she, and she talked about that, it wasn't even a concept. Like it didn't even cross her mind. Like, well, I'm going to go out there and fight for women. It was fighting for equality. And so the way she did a lot of that initially was because how she knew it would go over better is to fight for male equality. And then that led the way for female equality. And you know, I learned too, I didn't realize that she wasn't always this loved figure by women because she didn't agree with the Roe v. Wade decision. She believes in the right to choose, but she was smarter than everybody gave her credit for because she didn't like the way the Supreme Court just changed everything all at once and everything surrounding abortion was constitutionally legal. And she said, the fact that we did it that way, we're going to face problems in the future for tearing it down because they didn't go through that rigorous step-by-step legal process to make it stick. And now we are maybe about to see that come true, unfortunately.
Our generation, the things that we take for granted sometimes, and then you hear all these things that she accomplished during her tenure, you know, took the thought of not being able to sign your own documents or buy your own house as a woman. I mean, just the simple things that we take for granted.
I can't trust you with a credit card unless you have a man overseas.
I handle it.
It feels unfathomable now, but it was so recent, and it shows to me how much the country can change in a short period of time. And even looking at you three and how responses to your music and your public persona have changed just in the last 15 years, I think is another great example of that change. Are you hopeful for the potential for change? What's giving you hope for the next generation?
I can't allow myself to be hopeful until November. I have to. I actually will lose all hope in November. So if Trump,
I'm hopeful because of our daughters and the way that they act and the things that are important to them or that they can brush off are totally light years ahead of where I was when I was 15. My oldest is 15. I have an 8-year-old. And the way she approaches the world is just open-eyed and like, of course I can do that. Of course, of course it's going to be this way. We have to change things systematically, but I think the girls of the next generation are automatically stepping into the rights of what they should be allowed to do. And so I think I'm hopeful because of the next generation.
Yeah.
Well, if we lose our democracy, their spirit won't matter. But listen, I hate to get real negative. But they can make a difference in a different country.
Marty, what about you? Anything that giving you hope these days or a bit split?
Hard. It's so hard. I mean, literally sometimes I have to unplug and disconnect because I'm so scared of what could happen this next term and what it would mean. So, I think our collective message has been just please vote. We're just praying that all the people just vote so that they have a voice. Because my positivity lies in feeling like what is right and what is just is in the hearts of the majority. I have to believe that, or else I'm super depressed. So if everybody votes, I definitely think we have a chance. That's my hope.
Thank you so much, Natalie, Marty, and Emily for joining us for Time 100 Talks. And I know you have a performance of For Her, your new song off of the album Gaslighter, still ahead.
I'm Ashley C. Ford. Welcome back to Time 100 Talks. As we continue to speak with those who have made this year's Time 100 list, make sure to hit us up on social media. Use the hashtag Time100 Talks and let us know what you think of this year's Time 100 class. And speaking of this year's class, our next guest is a member of it. We have best-selling novelist Tomi Adeyemi. She'll be joined by Time's Lucy Feldman.
Hi, I'm Lucy Feldman, and I'm so happy to be talking with 2020 Time 100 honoree Tomi Adeyemi. Welcome, Tomi.
Hi.
We've got to just start with the fact that you're on the Time 100 this year. How does that feel?
It's honestly feeling realer every time you say it. And so I think surreal, exciting and surreal. Yeah, because when you have something that you've looked like up to or you've admired for so many years, and you have people that you've admired and people who inspire you, it's one thing when you start to be like acknowledged by them, but then it's another thing when you start to be like grouped with them. So I think there's like this extreme glee, and then this like, wow, I can't believe this is really happening. But it just makes me like continue to enjoy hearing every time you say it.
I love that you bring up surreal, because I feel like surreal is a wonderful word to describe really this whole year, and particularly the past 6 months or so.
Yes.
How are you doing with everything? What has this time with the pandemic and this major movement for racial justice looked like for you?
I think I perceive reality strangely to begin with. That's just been the sense I've been getting from people. Like, I don't know if you have ever seen Community, but Abed and like Abed sees the world through television shows, and then Annie is like very type A and always about her list and like crossing off her to-do list and achieving these things. And so it's like I already see the world like a sitcom when it's going well, and then a drama when it's going poorly. And we've just had so many back-to-back life-changing global, like it's become almost a joke. Like I keep waiting for them to announce the aliens have landed, and I kind of keep waiting. I hope that goes in like 2021, but it's just been such a crazy year that it feels like the only thing left to happen. So in a way, the intensity of the year, it's just been ups and downs, because when you're trapped inside and you're really trapped with yourself and you're trapped with your thoughts, it's like, I feel like I met myself through this quarantine because we just spent so much in an uninterrupted time together. And so it got, those big questions of like, okay, like there's no hiding from the fact that all of our days are numbered. And I've never really been able to hide from it, but it just feels like that's been the message, whether it's the bees, whether it's brutality, whether it's the virus, whether it's whatever is next, whether it's the hurricane, whether it's the fire, it's like, it is such a nonstop. And I think because I've always been grappling with my mortality, it's given me a little bit more freedom, in the sense of like, you knew this time was limited. You still don't know how much time you have, but you know now exactly what you want to do with it. So I've just been spending as much time as possible in that place.
One of the most powerful things about your two books, Children of Blood and Bone and Children of Virtue and Vengeance, is how you have centered the bravery and the heroism of Black characters, and particularly Black girls. And I was reviewing some of your past interviews, and I know that you've talked about how when you were first kind of starting out writing, you would default to writing characters who didn't look like you. I'm so inspired by the way that you have sort of stood up for representation, and I'd love to hear more about how your thinking has evolved on who gets to be a hero.
There's sort of this theory or this school of thought that like as children we're perfect, and then you internalize all of this trauma and societal messaging from childhood to young adulthood to adulthood. And then in adulthood, I guess the idea is to undo that programming and get back to what you were before everyone else got involved in your head. Like, what did it sound like in your head? What did it look like in your head? What did it feel like in your head before you let all these other people in? I think that's part of like the quiet. And when I was a kid and I started writing, the characters weren't just Black, they were me. And then I would make more of me. Like, that's how comfortable I was with myself. That's how much I love I'm like, oh, I wish I could just play with myself. And we all, the three of us and would ride horses and we'll wear these socks. Like, it was a whole thing. And so when I realized that in my later childhood stories, I was gone, and not just me, but like all Black characters, it was this realization of like, oh, okay, you started being comfortable with yourself. You started seeing yourself as the protagonist. Society and all the stories you watched told you that wasn't right. And so it was like reteaching myself. Honestly, it's almost next year, it'll be 10 years because I started reteaching myself to see myself in my stories when I was 18. So it's like, this is year 9 in the journey, and it's literally been a journey. Like, it started with, okay, one character in this book is Black, to literally now Children of Virtue and Vengeance, and me wanting to see like a Crimes of Grindelwald style picture of all these actors, melanated actors with all these different features and all, it's like, it literally, it started from 0, and now it's grown to this. And I've started looking at my favorite like Black female artists and icons that way and seeing like, oh yeah, they also grew into themselves. They also grew into, there's a journey from single ladies to Beychella. It's like you start really seeing like, oh, okay, that's what growing up is. It's almost falling back in love with yourself and falling back in love with what is unique about you. And I found the more I fall in love with myself, the more I fall in love with other people, because differences no longer become something that like trigger you or stress you out. It's just like, oh, that works for you, cool. Literally doesn't affect me, like you just start to become really chill because you're like, no, I know this now that this is calm. I accept whether it's positive, whether it's negative. You're like, that's okay, because this is going to be the same no matter what's happening. And so getting to that place of comfort, I think you'll see it through my stories as they become bigger, as they become more melanated, as they become more of a celebration of not just Blackness, but femininity, which has been like I've really fallen in love with, I'm always like, oh, people are going to take things out of context. It's like, I've fallen in love with women. I've fallen in love with like, oh my gosh, I like how we do our hair. I like how we smell. I like how we feel, just like, just truly falling in love with the concept of these differences and getting to, I feel lucky that everything I feel in my heart, I kind of get to express in these extended metaphors through these stories and allow people to feel the joy in their hair or in their skin or in their emotions, in their rage, in their adventure. And so I guess this is a long-winded way of saying it's been a tough journey. It's been a very tough journey. And I know it's a lifelong journey, but being 10 years into it and sort of accelerating through that journey through the isolation of quarantine, it's just put me in this place of like, I guess going back to our first question, I used to be more concerned about when the game was going to end. And now I'm more focused on just playing the game. It doesn't quite matter when it ends because you don't have control. And when it ends, it's over. So it's like, just play it, enjoy it, enjoy this, enjoy this, enjoy it. It's here. This is, I know people talk about the simulation, but I'm like, you know what? Okay, this is the simulation. And it's not all bad. We got pizza, we got dogs. So it's like, that's more my vibe. It's like I spent a lot of time in fear of all the painful parts of life. But if you are only focused on all the sucky parts, you're gonna miss what could be the good parts.
And something that I believe you're moving forward on and enjoying right now, correct me if I'm wrong, is the script for the movie adaptation of Children of Blood and Bone.
I'm not reading it yet, but the adaptation process, that's something that's also been kicked up in quarantine because, again, we're stuck at home. And so that might be the other thing. For creators, we almost like to be stuck at home because usually we're at an event or we're at this, and so we don't get to create. Whereas now, through this time, we've gotten to really connect, really solidify the vision, not just for like the first movie, but for the franchise, and start just, we've always been excited, but this year has also given us this sense of like, okay, it's time. Both with George Floyd, with the passing of great Black men like Kobe and Chadwick Boseman. It's just this sense of like, I'm no longer kind of allowing myself to look at those things as like through a lens of grief, more in a lens of, wow, these people lived so greatly. They played the game to their fullest. Now you got to play the game. You know, he led with Black Panther. You got to take this torch and do justice so that when you pass, someone else can take the torch and do, you know, it's like, and I think that's that greater story like mindset, but it's like, okay, if you look at it like a game and you look at it like, you know, everyone runs a different leg of the marathon, then you can kind of just get excited about running your leg. And that's with Rick Famuyiwa and with the development executives at Lucasfilms, you know, like that's the mindset we have right now. Like, this is our leg of the marathon and we want it to be the most epic, most magical, most dramatic, like, I just love movies. I love movies. You know, like I texted the director, I'm like, did you see the Dune trailer? Our trailer's gonna be so cool. You know, like there's just this passion. I think that's the word, extreme passion, because we don't take for granted the chance to tell a story like this. It means a lot to have a book, but it's like you see, you know, we are all inspired by stories, and when you get to put those stories on screen, especially on a screen with the backing of Disney, it's like, oh, okay, we could change this. Like Star Wars changed the entire industry in the world. Harry Potter did the same. Lord of the Rings did the same. So it's like we get to tell an epic story with characters people have never seen before, with mythology they've never seen before, with languages. You know, it's just like,
yeah, it's huge.
Yeah,
it's a huge opportunity. And I love that you brought up Star Wars because, of course, John Boyega wrote the tribute to you for the Time 100. And he basically is applying for a job to be in the movie. Does he get the job?
He wrote a very good tribute. And I have to say that's better than anybody else's. Here's why I should be in the movie. I would absolutely love it. I really want this to also be like this beacon for the Nigerians in entertainment. It kind of already is, because it's like I'm Nigerian and Rick is Nigerian. And I think we're really creative, but we're not allowed to be creative because we're supposed to be lawyers and doctors and engineers. And so I feel like this is also not just a chance to change the industry, but to add like artists to that list of jobs that Nigerians and like first generation Nigerians are allowed to be. And there's just so much talent. And I think of people who inspire me like Cynthia Erivo and Yvonne Orji, and just like when I'm writing even the books, I think of all the people I want to see and all the people. It's like, okay, you're here, you're here, you're here. How magical would it be if you're all in one scene? How magical would it be if you're not just in one scene, but you're in multiple movies? Like, I'm hoping this brings people together, but then also brings us a bunch of new faces that we haven't seen before. Because, yeah, there needs to be more roles.
You also brought up Harry Potter, which has been in the news a lot lately because of J.K. Rowling's anti-trans comments and writing. And I'm so curious because I know how important Harry Potter was to you growing up and how formative it was for you. How are you processing this conversation?
Honestly, I went through such waves, like such waves throughout this entire journey. Because even when the book started getting published, it was like the new J.K. Rowling, and a lot of questions were like, how do you feel? How do you feel? But rewatching Harry Potter in quarantine, and this is like March. So we just got quarantine. We're all worried we're gonna die. And I hadn't done this since it aired. So since the original movies were coming out, it's like I hadn't gone through a marathon. And first movie, as soon as that music plays, I'm always like a kid in a candy store, but I was like I was sitting there, like just there. And as I went through that journey, and I remembered everything that this series meant for me, and I remembered the kid I was watching it being like, oh my God, like how cool. I wish I could do something like this. And so now I'm watching it as an adult, and I'm like, you're doing it. You're doing it. I cannot ignore or I cannot or will not deny that this series changed my life. That because of the work this woman did, this is now the work I'm doing, that I'm trying to put another series, a magical series. And also, for me, because this is my job, I don't just look at these people. Like these are, for me, these are my Michael Jordans, these are my Kobe Bryants. It's like, no, you did. J.R.R. Tolkien to me invented fantasy, and J.K. Rowling perfected it. And so for me, it took me out of this place of anger to this place of these are your views. And because of all the information that's come out this year, especially about political figures, and especially about, the illicit activities I don't feel like saying it on this thing, but there's been a lot of dark news that is broken this year about public figures. I'm in a place of, if I don't agree with something, I don't care if we have different opinions. Everyone has different opinions. And so for me, I am more focused on, do you actively hurt people? That's the personal line I've had to draw, because again, I'm a Black female. A lot of people say bad things about me on the internet. And a couple years ago, that used to hurt me more. But again, now I'm in this place of, it's okay if you don't like me. I probably don't like you either. And we're probably never gonna, And so for me, I am no longer willing to crucify people because they have an opinion that differs from my own. I'm more interested in the person you are, the work you've done, also the good you've done, which I think is, I'm like, the one trivia fact I have in my head is I think she's the first person to not to lose her billionaire status because she gave so much money away to charity. I know this in itself is a controversial thing, but I'm just in a place in my life where it's like, if you are abusing your power and hurting people, that's my no-go list. If you have a different opinion than me, if you have a different political belief than me, that's fine. We don't need to agree to be able to sit down and learn from each other, be inspired by each other, work together.
So for you, the line is that, are you saying physically? Is that what you mean by actively? If you're actively?
Yeah, and for me, the line is abuse of power, especially if you're using that power to abuse someone who is less powerful than you, whether that's because they're a child, whether that's because they're like, again, it's really abuse of power. Are you using your position? Are you using your influence? Are you using what you have to add suffering to someone's life? That is literally how I define it.
You kind of brought this up at the beginning of our conversation, and I'm just wondering, with everything that's been going on in the world that we've been talking about, what do you hope to see on the other side of the pandemic when we kind of reemerge and come back together? What is your vision, your wish for the world?
It's funny because my optimism, I'm always confused by myself in the sense that I am extremely optimistic and also I think is extremely pessimistic and fatalistic. But it's like when you look at the stories of humanity and when you look at the civilizations, when you look at the governments, when you really start like looking and understanding that those were people who were just as smart as you, who were just as like I think I saw something, I don't know if this is exactly the right historical fact, but they found some like historical army, like Roman armies, and they were making like penis jokes. And so it's when you realize like, oh, these were just people. All these stories they teach us in history, that Hamilton, Aaron Burr duel, all of it, everyone was just people. And people have always been kind of at war with each other. It's just like, again, in our head, we have this utopia, we have this vision of perfection, which I think is important because it means we're always reaching towards it. But it's never been achieved in human history. There's never been a period without trial. There's never been a period without strife. There's never been a period without pain. There's never been a period without suffering. And I learned I go through a character arc every time I write a book. And so the character arc lesson I got writing book 2, because Zaylee is kind of spending that book trying to avoid pain. And there's one moment where she realizes, oh, pain, that is life. Life isn't trying to get by the potholes of suffering. Life is actually just the suffering. Oh.
I hear that though, and it sort of connects back to everything that you're saying about the moment that you're in and how you're just trying to be present, doing the work every day, the thing that feels most important. And that's, I think, fantastic.
If you accept that there's so much suffering and then the focus becomes alleviating it. Like, okay, yeah, if there's going to be suffering, what can I do to alleviate it? What can I do personally? What can I do for my family and friends? What can I do for my team? What can I do for my readers? What can I do for my dog? It's like you accept that it's like renovating. There's always going to be something that needs fixing. Now I'm just focused on the fixing. And so it's almost a foundation of pessimism that creates all this optimism because it's no longer like, this is bad and you're bad and this is bad and this is bad. It's like, I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you. This is bad. I'm going to fix this. And it focuses and it's not so cluttered anymore. And it's not so volatile and it's not so easily pressed by the buttons of the world. It's like, is this someone's opinion or is this a problem? And for me, like I said, problems are suffering. Are you abusing someone? Are you hurting someone? Those are the people I don't have any space in my life for. But other than that, it's like I said, there's so much suffering, which means we have a lot of work to do if we're going to try and alleviate some of it before it's time to hand over the controller to someone else. And so it's sort of forcing that presence and such a weird optimism to have, but it's like, that's the only way I can describe it. It's like, Maya Angelou said, like, do the best you know until you know better and then do better. And I'm like, that's it.
Yes.
That's it. Just keep doing better.
That's a wonderful quote and a wonderful lesson. And thank you, Tomi, for everything that you do through your fiction and through being an outspoken, wonderful advocate. And congratulations once again.
Thank you.
You're watching Time 100 Talks, and up next, we have Sister Norma Pimentel. She'll be joined by former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Julián Castro, who recognized Sister Norma for her humanitarian work.
Hi, I'm Justin Moreland, and I'm joined here today by Time 100 2020 honoree, Sister Norma Pimentel, as well as Secretary Julián Castro, who served in the Obama administration before his 2020 run for president. Secretary Castro wrote about the humanitarian work that Sister Norma has done at the US-Mexico border. Welcome to Time 100 Talks. Sister Norma, I want to start with you and just ask you, what does this recognition being on the Time 100 mean to you?
You know, sometimes I have a hard time without being recognized myself, because it represents a lot of pain for so many families that I've encountered, and I've seen their suffering up front very closely. And so, but I think it represents for me an opportunity to bring forward these innocent victims of families that I've seen for so many years, and recognize the fact that they're people, and this recognition can showcase the fact that we must pay attention to them, you know.
Well, Secretary Castro, I just want to ask, why was it important for you to take the time to write about Sister Norma?
Well, I think she's fantastic. You know, I've been amazed by Sister Norma's work and the compassion, the commitment that she has brought, not only in the last few years when we've had a federal government that has used cruelty as a means of I think, dealing with migrants, but also through the years, she has been devoted to treating every single human being that she comes in contact with, people who are seeking a better life on this side of the border, with compassion and easing their pain and suffering just a little bit more. And she's done that in a very selfless way with the help of a lot of people. She's modest, but with the help of a lot of people, but also with tremendous leadership. And I think that's very deserving of recognition, especially in these times.
Sister Norma, you've been working on these issues for decades. What have been the implications of COVID-19, both for migrants and for your work on the border?
You know, it has made it more difficult for the families. It's harder for me to see the families suffering more because of COVID. The families are not able to continue that immigration process. It's all on stops. And because of COVID, the Mexican government does not allow them to enter the camp anymore. Any new refugees are left outside. And so COVID has brought in a harsher response for the care that we must have for the families, you know. And so thank God that COVID has not entered the camp. You know, the families you don't see them sick. They carry on, and we don't see them at all with any symptoms of being affected by the virus. So that is a blessing.
Thinking both about COVID, but also this political moment, how challenging is it for migrants, particularly when you reflect on the course of your time working on this?
You know, it's unfortunate that the whole immigration reality, the fact that people, human beings, are coming to the United States simply for the reason that they're afraid for their lives, especially of their children. And because of all the political scheme that is going on, they're being used as a way to showcase their political agenda or whatever it is that they want, rather than focusing on the actual need of the immigration reality, the crisis that we're seeing, the humanitarian suffering of people. That is totally disregarded. And it's unfortunate that they're victims of that.
Yeah. Well, Secretary Castro, immigration reform was a key part of your campaign last year when you ran for president. And I'm just curious whether you could speak to some of the key components that are part of what you called a quote, humane border policy.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that we need to replace the cruelty that we've seen over these last few years with compassion and with common sense. And there's so many changes that need to be made, but one of the ones that Sister Norma is grappling with in her work on a daily basis, and that she's referring to, these migrant camps, stems from this administration's Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, or Remain in Mexico policy. It used to be, for so many years, the policy of the United States to allow people who were seeking asylum, for instance, in our country, to do so here in the United States. Instead, thousands of potential asylees have been left to fend for themselves in Mexico and be more subject to violence, potentially to disease, to a harder life because of that. Immediately, the next administration, I believe, if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are elected, they're going to have an opportunity to reverse these executive decisions that Donald Trump has made, including the Remain in Mexico policy. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. I believe that we need to do that, and we also need to ensure that we put the 11 million undocumented immigrants who are here on a pathway to citizenship. We need to close these private detention centers and instead come up with a pragmatic, workable way to get people to family members who are here already, or to establish a home for unaccompanied minors as quickly as possible, instead of what we've seen over the last few years.
Well, I'm curious to hear from both of you about this question, but obviously the U.S. is a country of immigrants, and somehow the narrative, at least certainly from the president, has turned migrants into criminals. That's been the narrative from some folks. How does that narrative change? What can be done to change that narrative? And I'll start with you, Secretary Castro, and then I'd love to hear from Sister Norma as well.
Well, look, and Sister Norma knows this better than I do. Let's be honest, there's a long history that predates this president of immigrants being scapegoated, and then specifically immigrants from Latin America being painted as dangerous and criminals. And Donald Trump took that to another level. The next president and the next Congress and all of us in our daily lives have an opportunity to help change that narrative by telling the stories of migrants who are simply seeking a better life, letting people know, educating the American public about the reality. The vast majority of these folks are like everybody else. They simply want better for their children. They want to be able to be free from violence, from other threats. They see America, like generations of the past have, as a beacon of opportunity, and they want to be a part of that. So we can change our immigration laws, and I believe we're going to have a chance to do that in 2021. I believe we're going to change presidents, which is important. We can take our own responsibility in helping to change that narrative. Media have an important responsibility to tell their stories accurately and to help change, to tell the truth. And I think that we also need to raise a generation of young people in the years to come that has an appreciation for the contributions that people of different lands who have come to the United States have made, so that these bad, negative narratives don't take hold the way that they have in years past.
Right. Sister Norma, do you?
Yes, that would be wonderful. I think that the narrative, unfortunately, that we hear, I've run into, for example, a lady at the supermarket, and she tells me, hermana, tengo miedo. And I said, she's afraid. And I said, why? What is it that you're afraid of? Of all those people that you are helping. And I said, why? Why are you afraid of them? Because of all the things that you hear in the media, and that they're criminals. They're not. I spent all day with them. And they're beautiful people. They're mothers and fathers. They care for their children. They cry for them. They wish the best. They come and bring to us something good. Yes, there may be one person that may be bad, but that doesn't make them all bad. Just like there are bad people here too as well. We have to recognize the diversity and how that diversity brings something good, as we all do. And so I think that learning to be open and welcoming allows us to be able to see the other person for who they are and respect them for the person that they are, And so I think that we definitely have to break away from that fear that has been placed on us to be afraid for something that we don't know. And I always invite, Ben, come and see. If you can see what I see, I am certain you will feel how I feel about these families and these children.
Well, I wanted to ask, you invited President Trump to come when he was in Texas to see your center and to see your work, and he didn't show up. But
I certainly hope that he could have, because I think as the position that he holds is very important, and he must be able to come close to see the people, so that the things that he does and he makes the decision as important as they are can be based on what he have experienced and then from there make a decision for the good of all.
Well, Secretary Castro, I want to ask about your immigration plan. Again, you referenced climate change and some of the effects of climate change for people that have driven people to the U.S. And I just wondered if you could speak a little bit about that. What role has climate played in driving immigration?
Well, I mean, it's playing a greater and greater role in the movement of people, the need for people to move across borders. And, one estimate I saw said over the next few decades that up to 200 million people could be considered climate refugees. For those who think, well, look, what are you talking about? Just think about what we're watching right now on the West Coast, in California, in Oregon, and how that has caused the movement of many people. And those are fairly, some of them are densely populated, like the San Francisco Bay Area. They're also sparsely populated areas. But people having to move because of this, and we know that these kinds of events are getting more frequent because of climate change. Well, that's happening around the world. So I propose in my plan that the United States create a specific category for climate refugees. Number one, we need to take in more refugees in general, because particularly under this Trump administration, they have whittled that down and whittled that down. I don't think America is doing what it can by far. It needs to do more with refugees generally, but we also need to be responsive to the reality of climate refugees. And then most importantly, as you know, we actually need to address climate change in a robust and effective way in this country. And in so many ways, we're going to have the opportunity to do that, I think, beginning in early 2021.
Sister Norma, I just wanted to ask whether, in your conversations with people who you interact and work with, whether that's something they talk about, because of course violence drives people from cities, but drought.
Yes, I totally agree. Many of the families have shared with us the reasons why they come, and one of them is precisely that they're farmers, they're people that work out in the country and their land is dry. They can't really grow anything anymore. And they even people from the furthest end of Mexico, like Oaxaca and all those areas, Chiapas, they're coming north because really they're not able to grow anything anymore, and a lot of it evidently has to be because of the climate change,
One thing that I feel like conversation about immigration is often about the border and, immigration enforcement policies, but what should be done to support people before they feel the need to be driven from their homes? I mean, are there things that the U.S. should be doing? And I leave that question to both of you. I'll start with you, Sister Norma.
Yes, well, obviously, if people would rather stay home, I think they lose everything. They uproot themselves from their culture, their families, their everything. And so if they had a choice, I visited a family in the Bay Area in California, and they really were hurting that they couldn't go back home, but if we could, the United States, the governments need to help each other to stabilize those countries. The biggest problem is organized crime. Why don't we focus on those guys, get rid of them, dismantle all this, because that's the serious problem. If you can work at addressing that really problem, you would fix everything, I think, as far as why people have to migrate. They're not safe, they can't work, they cannot live there, their lives are in danger. This is very serious. And so working at stabilizing and contributing to any efforts done in those countries to help families stay home, I think that's where our efforts need to be,
Right. Secretary Castro, did you?
Yeah, I agree. And for many, many years, the United States has not given enough time, attention, and I think effort to cultivating positive, strong relationships with these Latin American countries, whether we're talking about the Northern Triangle countries or other countries, including these days Mexico. One of the things I called for was essentially a Marshall Plan for Latin America with a focus on these Northern Triangle countries so that we could engage at a level of mutual respect to try and create the opportunity for people, if they're in Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala, to be able to have better job opportunities, to be safer, so that, as Sister Norma says, that they can stay in their home. Nobody likes to, these folks are moving because they need to, because they're running from something and running toward what they believe is a better life. If we can get at the root of that challenge, then I think that's going to be a victory for everybody. Folks who would love to stay in their home country and prosper there, the United States and the relationship with those countries, and with the politics here in the United States that gets so charged up over these issues.
Totally agree.
Well, I want to ask you both. I mean, this COVID, this year with COVID and so much happening has created an opportunity for rejuvenation, for rethinking a lot of different things. And I'm just curious to both of you, what are your hopes for a post-COVID world, particularly along the issues that we're talking about, but also more broadly?
Well, definitely, we need to move forward to a world where we are more connected, united with each other, that we can work together to focus on the things that we have the same, so that we can move away from all this hatred and everything that has kind of like put a hold on us, on the world overall. I think that our country needs to work with other countries to be countries that work together and that focus on the goodness of life. I don't understand why we can't do that as people that all want that. We all want that. Why couldn't we just focus on developing that, and focus on the goodness and that we have to offer each other, and make the world a better world, and we're all hurting. COVID has taught us that there's no boundaries, we're all the same. We are affected exactly. We're all vulnerable and fragile. It shows us how united we must be to be able to be a better community, a better world.
Great. Secretary Castro.
I sure do hope that this experience that we're going through as a country, as a world, really, that it enhances community going forward. I also hope that, because I think this has been a real reckoning, the deeper that we get into it, it really is a reckoning with all of the dynamics that have created the kind of inequality that exists in our country. And that, as many people have said, the most vulnerable people have been hit the hardest, and they've also been the ones that have been asked to step up the most. And this is where our conversation, I think, intersects with vulnerable communities. Think about farm workers, for instance, or meatpacking plant workers that are still out there in their same, bad conditions with relatively meager pay, meager benefits, as it has been for years, but doing their hard work in the hot sun so that everybody has food on the table, even during this pandemic, risking their own health. Same thing with meatpacking plant workers and others. Well, the question is, what are we going to do for all of them and many others like them who are vulnerable, who don't have health care, who don't have enough to put food on their own table or to pay the rent and are threatened with eviction right now and will be, because we had a rental affordability crisis even before COVID-19 hit us. I hope that coming out of this, we're going to have more of a commitment, more of an understanding that we are a community, that we need each other, and more of a commitment to make the investments to see healthcare as a human right, to see housing as a human right, to try and ensure that we eliminate hunger in this country. And those all sound like big things, and they are big things, right? But they're not Pollyannish things. We can get closer and closer and closer to each and every one of them, I think, if we have the political will to do it.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Sister Norma and Secretary Castro, for taking the time to be here. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Justin, Sister Norma, and Julián Castro for that thoughtful conversation. And thank you to all of today's guests. I also want to thank Citi for making today's program and special conversations possible. And finally, I want to thank you, our audience, for tuning in. For more information on the 2020 Time 100, visit time.com. And don't forget, we'll be back tomorrow with more Time 100 discussions and performances. You won't want to miss it. And now, as promised, we have a special performance from the Chicks. Here they are performing For Her off their latest album, Gaslighter. This performance is dedicated to the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I'm a lover, 'cause I can't help myself, a natural mother, since the day that I fell, not a martyr. I'm just someone who cares. So dig a little bit deeper and be a little bit kinder and a lot less guarded, 'cause it takes a lot of hard work to get a whole lot stronger, 'cause it's real tough, girl. Why can't we be together? Why can't we love for her? Wish I could go back and tell my younger self, you're a fighter, you just don't know it yet. So dig a little bit deeper and be a whole lot louder and a lot less guarded, 'cause it takes a lot of hard work to get a whole lot stronger, 'cause it's real tough, girl. Why can't we be together? show up, stand up, show love for her, for her. Stand up, show love for her, for her. Stand up, show up for her, for her. Oh, stand up. Oh, stand up for her.
Protect, this new attitude should protect the maid who works at a hotel. And I think it is spreading so far. Yes, there will always be adjustments when there's a transition, but on the whole, I think it's amazing to me that for the first time, women are really listened to